Before we speak of politics, trade, or defense, let us remember this. A nation is more than its borders, more than its markets, more than its weapons. It is the spirit of its people, the courage to stand tall when the winds of pressure blow hardest. India's story has always been one of resilience, faith, and unyielding will. Today, we face another test, not just of our economy, but of our dignity. As you listen, open your heart and mind, for this is not just a speech. It is a call to unity, purpose, and the eternal spirit that defines who we are. The trade dispute between the United States and India has intensified sharply with Washington's decision to impose steep tariffs on Indian exports. Initially set at 25%, these duties were later increased to an unprecedented 50%, marking one of the highest tariff levels the U.S. has applied to any trading partner in recent years. The official justification given by the U.S. administration centers around India's continued purchase of Russian oil, despite Western-led sanctions against Moscow following the Ukraine conflict. American officials argue that such energy trade undermines collective efforts to isolate Russia economically, framing the tariff escalation as both a punitive measure and a means to pressure India into compliance with U.S. strategic objectives. From India's perspective, the move is seen as heavy-handed and unilateral, with significant implications for bilateral trade worth tens of billions of dollars annually. The targeted sectors include textiles, steel, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural products, all of which have strong domestic economic importance. Indian exporters now face sharply reduced competitiveness in the American market, threatening jobs and income in key industries. The escalation also signals a deeper geopolitical tension. It reflects how economic tools are increasingly being used to enforce foreign policy agendas, turning trade policy into a battleground for influence. While the U.S. insists it is defending global norms, India maintains that its actions in securing affordable energy supplies are rooted in national interest and energy security, not in any political alignment with Russia. The sudden increase in tariffs has not only strained commercial relations, but also raised broader questions about the resilience of U.S. India cooperation in strategic areas such as defense, technology, and climate initiatives. Both sides now face the challenge of balancing national priorities with the costs of an escalating economic confrontation. India's reaction to the U.S. tariff escalation was swift and firm, with government officials publicly condemning the move as unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. New Delhi's position is that the tariffs are a form of economic coercion that disregard the principles of mutual respect and equality that should guide bilateral relations. Indian leaders argue that the decision fails to acknowledge the country's legitimate need to secure affordable and stable energy supplies, especially in a volatile global market where prices fluctuate and supply chains are fragile. Indian officials emphasize that their energy strategy is not driven by ideology, but by practical necessity. With a population exceeding 1.4 billion and an economy still developing, affordable energy is critical to sustaining growth, supporting industry, and preventing inflation from hurting vulnerable communities. By targeting India over its Russian oil imports, New Delhi contends the U.S. is applying a double standard, pointing out that many Western nations have maintained or increased certain forms of trade with Russia, even while imposing sanctions. The government also underscores that these tariffs directly undermine sectors unrelated to energy, such as textiles, engineering goods, and agricultural exports. Such broad economic targeting, Indian leaders argue, cannot be justified under the pretext of political disagreements. Instead, they frame it as an overreach that risks damaging a partnership both nations have spent decades building. India's messaging is not only directed toward Washington, but also toward the international community, signaling that it will resist policies that it views as one-sided or coercive. In public statements, Indian ministers have reaffirmed their commitment to an independent foreign policy and strategic autonomy. making it clear that decisions in areas like defense procurement and trade will not be dictated by external pressure. This response reflects both domestic political considerations and a broader assertion of sovereignty on the global stage. India's stance on continuing to import Russian oil is rooted in the twin principles of strategic autonomy and energy security. Policymakers in New Delhi maintain that the decision is driven by economic and practical realities rather than ideological alignment. With its vast population and rapidly expanding economy, India faces an ever-growing demand for affordable energy to fuel industries, transportation, and household consumption. Russian oil, often sold at discounted rates, provides a stable and cost-effective option in a global market where volatility and supply disruptions are common. Strategic autonomy is a long-standing pillar of Indian foreign policy, emphasizing the country's right to make decisions that serve its national interest without succumbing to external pressure. In this context, energy procurement is seen as a sovereign choice. Indian leaders stress that access to reliable energy supplies is not merely an economic matter, but a national security imperative, influencing everything from agricultural productivity to industrial output. The government also highlights the inconsistencies in the criticism it faces. Many Western countries that have urged India to cut ties with Russian energy suppliers have themselves maintained certain levels of trade with Moscow, whether in the form of natural gas imports, fertilizers, or other commodities. Indian officials argue that this double standard undermines the moral weight of such demands and reinforces the need for India to chart its own course. Additionally, diversifying energy sources, including purchases from Russia, reduces overdependence on any single supplier or geopolitical bloc. This approach not only insulates India from sudden market shocks, but also strengthens its bargaining position in international energy negotiations. By framing its policy as a matter of resilience and independence, India seeks to ensure that its economic stability and development goals are not compromised by shifting geopolitical winds or unilateral sanctions imposed by other nations. Following the announcement of steep U.S. tariffs on Indian exports, several international news outlets reported that India had decided to halt or delay negotiations for major arms purchases from American defense contractors. These reports suggested that New Delhi was using defense procurement as a strategic lever, signaling displeasure over Washington's economic measures. The alleged pause was said to affect potential deals involving combat vehicles, missile systems, and other advanced military platforms, which have been under discussion as part of the broader U.S. India defense partnership. According to these accounts, the decision to pause discussions was portrayed as a direct response to the tariffs, meant to convey that economic penalties could have repercussions beyond trade and into the strategic domain. The implication was that India was willing to explore alternative suppliers, whether domestic manufacturers or partners in Europe, Israel, or Russia, if the United States pursued policies perceived as punitive. Such reports quickly gained traction in both defense and diplomatic circles, given the significant role U.S. arms sales have played in strengthening bilateral ties over the past 2 decades. India has increasingly diversified its military imports in recent years, and a slowdown in American defense deals would not only impact the U.S. defense industry, but also alter the trajectory of joint military exercises, technology sharing, and co-development initiatives. The narrative of a procurement pause also aligned with India's broader emphasis on strategic autonomy, suggesting that defense cooperation is not immune to political disagreements. While these claims were later contested by Indian officials, their initial spread underscored the sensitivity of defense relations and how quickly they can be drawn into broader geopolitical disputes. The episode illustrated that in high-stakes diplomacy, even unverified reports can influence perceptions and calculations on both sides. In response to widespread media reports claiming that India had paused or frozen its plans to purchase weapons from the United States, the Indian Ministry of Defense issued a swift and categorical denial. Officials described the stories as false and fabricated, emphasizing that no such directive had been issued and that ongoing procurement processes were continuing in accordance with established procedures. This rebuttal was aimed at quelling speculation that the tariff dispute had spilled over into the defense sector, potentially jeopardizing strategic cooperation between the two nations. The ministry's statement was direct and unambiguous, underscoring that India's defense acquisition process follows a structured, multi-stage protocol involving feasibility studies, cost evaluations, and negotiations. Any significant changes to procurement plans, they stressed, would be announced through official channels rather than through leaks or unverified reports. By reinforcing this message, the government sought to protect the credibility of its defense planning and avoid unnecessary disruption to ongoing projects. The denial also served to reassure both domestic and international stakeholders, including the Indian Armed Forces, U.S. defense companies, and other global partners watching the situation closely. For India, maintaining stability in defense procurement is critical not only for operational readiness, but also for sustaining confidence among suppliers and allies. Furthermore, the rebuttal reflected India's sensitivity to perceptions in the global arms market. Rumors of politically motivated procurement halts could give competitors leverage or weaken India's bargaining position in future deals. By publicly dismissing the reports, the government aimed to reaffirm that procurement decisions are made based on strategic requirements and national interest, rather than as reactionary measures tied to diplomatic tensions or media narratives. This approach reinforced India's image as a consistent and reliable partner in the international defense landscape. India's recent economic and defense policy direction reflects a broader strategy of reducing dependence on foreign suppliers and strengthening domestic manufacturing capabilities. This approach, branded under the Atmanirbhar Bharat, or Self-Reliant India initiative, has gained renewed urgency amid tariff disputes and geopolitical uncertainties. The government is channeling significant investment into sectors such as semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, fertilizers, and advanced defense technologies. The goal is to insulate the economy from external shocks while fostering indigenous innovation and industrial growth. In the defense sector, this push is particularly visible. India has been expanding its domestic arms manufacturing base, encouraging joint ventures between local firms and international partners, and incentivizing research and development within the country. By developing capabilities to produce combat aircraft, naval vessels, and missile systems domestically, India aims to reduce vulnerability to supply chain disruptions and political conditions imposed by exporting nations. This strategic realignment is not limited to defense. In the technology sector, India is positioning itself as a hub for chip manufacturing, seeking to secure a foothold in the global semiconductor supply chain. Similar efforts are underway in renewable energy storage, with large-scale battery production projects aimed at supporting the transition to cleaner transportation and reducing reliance on imported oil. This emphasis on self-reliance is also a response to changing global trade dynamics. As protectionism and geopolitical rivalries reshape supply networks, India's leadership views domestic capacity building as a safeguard against coercive economic measures. While partnerships with foreign companies will remain part of the strategy, the balance is shifting toward ensuring that critical sectors are anchored within India's borders. The overall objective is to create an economy and defense infrastructure that can withstand external pressures while enhancing the country's bargaining power on the world stage. The escalation of tariffs by the United States has triggered a ripple effect across both diplomatic and economic spheres in India, with annual exports to the U.S. valued at around $86 billion. The new trade barriers threaten to disrupt a significant portion of India's foreign revenue. Key sectors such as textiles, engineering goods, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural products face the immediate risk of reduced competitiveness in the American market, which could lead to job losses, lower production rates, and pressure on small and medium-sized enterprises that depend heavily on exports. Diplomatically, the dispute has introduced a strain into what had been steadily improving U.S.-India relations. The two nations had built closer ties over the past decade, cooperating in areas like defense, technology, counterterrorism, and climate initiatives. The tariff conflict has not only slowed this momentum, but has also created friction in ongoing strategic dialogues. Indian officials view the tariffs as a unilateral decision that undermines the principle of partnership, while U.S. policymakers frame them as a necessary response to India's Russian oil purchases. The fallout extends beyond bilateral ties, as the tension is closely watched by other nations. Allies and trade partners are assessing how the standoff might affect global supply chains, geopolitical alignments, and multilateral cooperation in forums such as the Quad. For India, there is also a domestic political dimension. Leaders must demonstrate that they can protect the country's economic interests while preserving its sovereignty in foreign policy. To counter the economic impact, India is considering targeted aid for affected industries, exploring new markets, and accelerating domestic reforms to boost competitiveness. At the same time, the government is using diplomatic channels to convey that long-term strategic cooperation should not be jeopardized by short-term trade disputes, even as it prepares for prolonged economic adjustments. India's approach to international relations is increasingly shaped by the goal of maintaining a diversified network of partnerships, rather than relying too heavily on any single ally. The recent tariff dispute with the United States has reinforced New Delhi's commitment to a multipolar strategy, where engagement is spread across various global power centers. This means deepening ties with traditional partners like Russia and France, expanding economic cooperation with the European Union, and strengthening its role in forums such as BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the G20. By balancing relationships in this way, India aims to protect itself from the vulnerabilities that come with overdependence on one geopolitical bloc. Strategic autonomy remains at the core of this approach, allowing India to pursue its own foreign policy priorities, whether in energy, defense, or trade, without having to compromise under external pressure. This balancing act also positions India as a bridge between competing global powers, enabling it to mediate and influence on issues like climate change, supply chain resilience, and regional security. The defense sector plays a key role in this rebalancing. While the U.S. remains an important partner, India is also procuring military hardware from other sources and increasing joint production ventures with nations such as Israel, Japan, and South Korea. Similarly, in trade, India is negotiating free trade agreements with multiple countries to offset the risks posed by protectionist measures from any one market. This broader alliance building effort also serves India's ambition to be seen as an independent global power capable of shaping international agendas. By avoiding the perception of alignment with just one side in global rivalries, India strengthens its bargaining position, ensures greater flexibility in decision-making, and preserves its ability to adapt swiftly to shifting geopolitical and economic landscapes. The imposition of steep U.S. tariffs on Indian exports has been interpreted in New Delhi not just as an economic action, but as a challenge to the country's dignity and sovereignty. Indian leaders view the move as an attempt to pressure the nation into altering its independent policy decisions, particularly its energy strategy, by using economic tools as leverage. For a country that has consistently championed strategic autonomy since its independence, this approach is seen as incompatible with the principles of equal partnership and mutual respect. National dignity in this context is closely tied to the ability to make decisions that serve domestic priorities without external interference. Energy security, agricultural stability, and defense procurement are regarded as matters of sovereign choice, not subjects for negotiation under duress. By framing the tariffs as a form of coercion, India's leadership is signaling both domestically and internationally that it will not allow foreign powers to dictate policy in critical sectors. Public sentiment within India reinforces this stance. Political parties, industry leaders, and media commentators have largely rallied around the idea that conceding to tariff-related pressure would set a dangerous precedent. This unified domestic position strengthens the government's resolve to resist such measures and reinforces the perception that defending sovereignty is as important as addressing the economic costs of the dispute. The challenge is further amplified by the symbolic dimension of the conflict. In the global arena, how a nation responds to external pressure becomes part of its reputation. By taking a firm stand, India aims to project an image of resilience and self-respect, assuring both allies and rivals that its strategic decisions are guided by national interest rather than imposed conditions. This episode underscores the deep connection between economic policy and the preservation of national pride. The current tariff dispute has cast a shadow over the trajectory of U.S. India defense relations, which had been steadily strengthening over the past 2 decades. Joint military exercises, technology, sharing agreements, and large-scale arms deals have formed the backbone of the partnership, aligning with shared strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific. However, the economic tension has introduced an element of unpredictability into this relationship, raising questions about whether both nations can maintain defense cooperation at the same pace while navigating political disagreements. Reports later denied by Indian officials about a potential pause in U.S. arms purchases illustrate how quickly economic disputes can spill into the strategic arena. Even without actual procurement freezes, the perception of strained defense ties can influence planning cycles, delay negotiations, and encourage India to diversify suppliers further. Countries such as France, Israel, and Russia remain viable alternatives, and India's increasing emphasis on indigenous defense production under the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative may accelerate efforts to reduce reliance on American systems. On the U.S. side, the dispute could complicate efforts to integrate India more deeply into defense arrangements like the Quad, where interoperability and shared military capabilities are crucial. While both nations continue to share long-term strategic objectives, such as countering regional instability and ensuring maritime security, the short-term climate is less certain. Diplomatic engagement will play a critical role in preventing defense ties from weakening further. Both sides face the challenge of separating long-term security cooperation from short-term trade conflicts, recognizing that defense partnerships are built over decades and can be difficult to rebuild once trust erodes. The next phase of negotiations, exercises, and co-development projects will be a test of whether the U.S.-India defense relationship can weather the turbulence created by the tariff dispute and maintain its strategic momentum. In this moment of challenge, India stands unshaken, its sovereignty intact, its resolve unwavering. We face tariffs, disputes, and pressures not as obstacles, but as reminders of who we are. A nation that will choose its own path, guard its dignity, and honor its commitments to its people above all else. Partnerships may be tested, but our principles remain unbroken. We will adapt, innovate, and emerge stronger, turning every trial into an opportunity. Thank you for standing together in this cause. May strength guide our actions, wisdom shape our choices, and unity lead us forward. Good luck, and God bless.